All right. I think I'm done talking. I think that's everything I needed to say.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Let's do it. Where'd the dot go? There it is. Found it. All right, here we go. What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome to the show. I am super stoked to have you. The Beyond UX Design shop is open. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/shop to pick up some big, beautiful art prints of some of my favorite UX and software-related quotes, or you can pick up some digital downloads and print them yourself. Get free shipping on all orders over $30 and use the code LISTENER to get 10% off your entire order. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/shop and get your print on. This week's episode is brought to you by Wix Studio. Career shifters, people building portfolios, case studies, web designers. This one is for you. I've got only 1 minute to tell you about Wix Studio, the web platform for agencies and enterprises. So here are a few things that you can do from start to finish in 1 minute or less on Studio. You can adapt designs for every device with responsive AI. You can reuse assets like templates, widgets, sections, and design libraries across sites and share them with your team. You can switch up styling of hundreds of web pages. That means fonts, layouts, colors, all in a click. You can add no-code animations and gradient backgrounds right in the editor. And my favorite, you can export your designs from Figma to Wix Studio in just one click. Oh, and one more big one, package and deliver everything that your client needs in one smooth handover. So time's up, but the list keeps going. Step into Wix Studio and see for yourself. Check out beyonduxdesign.com/Wix and start creating today. And if you haven't done it already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you are regular here, and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. Not just 5 stars, I'm talking about a couple sentences too. Apple loves that stuff, and so do I. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, Marty for all their support. And if you want to join those fine folks and many others and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you'll get rough transcripts and exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, including episodes before they're released. And you can get instant access right now to the video archives for as little as $5 a month. And for more information on how you can support the show and help more people find out about what we're doing here, make sure to check out beyonduxdesign.com/support. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then I would love it if you told some friends. So I've been around the block for a little while now, and I've noticed a disconnect. There's a disconnect between what people are often taught and how they approach designing products and the way people actually use the products. So we design for the ideal, I think, a lot of times, and we forget the edge cases. And that's great when it works, but when it doesn't work, watch out. Well, Emily Anderson has seen this too, and I'm really excited to have her join me today. And we're going to talk all about that disconnect and what you, as a UX designer, can do about it. So Emily, welcome to Beyond UX Design. I am so excited to have you on. How's it going?
Hey, yes, I am really excited to be here. Finally, I feel like I've seen clips of this for months and years, to be honest. So I'm excited to actually be a guest.
Right on. Well, I am excited to have you on. Yeah, this almost didn't happen actually because I completely forgot to book the. I forgot to send you the link. It worked out. It will work. I'm not very good at organizing a podcast. I think I'm okay with like the recording part. I'm okay with the mixing part, but it's the actually getting people booked and on that I think I often struggle with. But
admin is not fun.
I don't know. I need a producer. If anyone out there wants to be a producer for Beyond UX Design for completely free and no money at all, it looks great in a resume. Shoot me an email and we can talk about it. All right, Emily. So I am so excited to have you on the show today. But before we kick it all off, we're going to be doing a LinkedIn Live event where we're gonna dig into this idea of happy path versus real life, real scenarios, and all that stuff. We're going to be hanging out, I think we said August the 22nd. We haven't picked a time yet, so keep an eye on LinkedIn, your email, newsletter. Sign up for the newsletter at beyonduxdesign.com, and you will get an email, I promise. Check out LinkedIn. Anything specific you want to have people ask about Emily during our live event?
I guess anything around how to uncover risks or how to like bring your team along the journey, documenting it and things like that.
Maybe some tactical stuff, like how to get your team on board with these things. Awesome, cool. So get your questions in early at beyonduxdesign.com/events. Sign up for the live events. We do it on YouTube and LinkedIn, and you can put those on your calendar. And you can also get your questions in early So you're not, we're not fumbling around trying to find questions the day of the thing. I can organize it all and get it all in there. So beyonduxdesign.com/events. Find us on August 22nd. What day is that? That is a Thursday. Time TBD. Join Emily and me live, LinkedIn or YouTube. All right. So Emily, you post about this all the time on LinkedIn. And for anybody out there listening that is not familiar with Emily and you're not following Emily, I don't know what you're doing with your life. You should be following her on LinkedIn because she's always got some really insightful content. And a lot of your content tends to revolve around design for the ideal, the happy path, but when things go wrong. And so I'm really excited to have you chat about that today. So before we do that, though, for those who don't know you, why don't you tell everybody listening a little bit about you, who you are, and how'd you get to a place where you decided designers aren't doing it right?
Well, I'll try and do my intro justice. Yes, so I'm Emily Anderson, and I guess by title, I'm a product designer. It's funny because I actually did a degree in physical product design. And when I came out of university and started looking at all the jobs, I was like, this is not what I was taught. Where's all the engineering? What is a wireframe? How is all of this? Like, what am I doing? I transitioned into UX many years ago, and I've worked across kind of really quite emotionally charged industries. So things like finance, healthcare. I've worked in gambling as well, very, very emotionally charged. And then essentially I've just from personal experiences, I've started seeing that a lot of the time in UX, we focus on the happy path. We focus on, this ideal user, John Smith, Jane Doe, all of that kind of thing. But there isn't enough of people that talk about the other side of design where it's not always the happy path and people are made to feel like edge cases sometimes. And that can really impact the people and businesses. So I started writing about it on LinkedIn about a year ago, which feels pretty wild to say that I've been doing it for I've stuck to something for about a year.
It's impressive.
And it seems to just be resonating with people, to be honest, to see that actually, if you think about what can go wrong, how can you turn that to look at how does that affect the business? If you intentionally block people from signing up, then that can affect your conversion and all that kind of stuff. So trying to look at thinking about what can go wrong can actually be good for businesses and for the people. Just playing around on LinkedIn.
I love that. Yeah, that's totally true. And I'm not surprised that it's resonated with people too, to be honest, because, when we talk about designing the happy path, what we're often designing for is the average.
Yeah.
Right. And in reality, though, there is no average. Nobody's average, this average family has 2.5 children. Nobody has 2.5 children, right? They either have one or they have 3. Maybe there's 2, but nobody has 2.5. So when you try to design for 2.5 children, no one's going to be happy. And so I'm not surprised that it's resonated with a lot of folks because no one is the average, So I think that's something that we often forget. Yeah. The average doesn't exist.
The average doesn't exist. And I think that sometimes it can make people feel that they're not catered for, and that can completely put you off using the product and service. We are all, us as people, yes, we're designers, but we are also people, and we use these experiences. We use these apps and services, and sometimes, and you just think, well, I can't do that. Why aren't you catering for me? And I know that in businesses, we have to prioritize things. We can't design for every single person and every single situation. But I think the thing that's missing a lot of the time is the awareness and the intentional decision of who are we and who are we not designing for. Sometimes it's, we'll just do that and then we never come back to it, but you don't think about the impact that it can actually have.
I want to get your thoughts here because I wonder, where does this come from? Maybe this is like a philosophical, existential question, I guess, but where does this come from your perspective? Like, do you think it's education's wrong? Do you think there's something wrong with how software teams run? Do you think it's something else? Like, where, from your perspective, and you've been doing this a long time, where did the industry go wrong and how did we get here?
There's so many things that we could go into here. But I think it stems into everything, to be honest. It stems from like how we frame things like research. A lot of the time, it's moving towards like the validation space rather than actually discovering the different scenarios and how people, like the context of people that use things. That also, if you look at things like there's less in-person field research to see the environments that people are using things in. We do a lot of like remote testing now after COVID and budgets cut and all that kind of stuff. So sometimes we actually don't necessarily have that awareness to think how are people actually using things versus how we think they're using things. And like I said, that can go back to how we frame research questions and things. Also as well, there has been a shift in tech to, move fast and break things. And that's not always the right approach. Yes, we need to build, but then we forget sometimes that tech can have a real impact. If I give you an example, which is going to just diverge a little bit.
Go for
it. The main reason, which some people know if you've been following me for a little while, is the main reason I started posting on LinkedIn was because my granddad passed away. And as part of that process, my grandma, we had to unsubscribe from a lot of his subscription services. So every company we had to go to and cancel. And it was like clockwork. Honestly, we got email after email saying things like, "We're so sorry to see you go, Mr. Clark," like using his name, "come back for 15% off, come back for 20% off. We're going to miss you," like crying emojis and things. And it was really, really difficult in that moment because I had to sit my grandma down and basically say, "You're an unhappy past." She was saying, "These companies are making fun of me. They think I'm stupid. They're trying to all of these things." And I was saying to her, like, "No, that's not the case. It's not, no one is intentionally trying to make you feel bad. You're just an offboarding journey that nobody has considered." And these were huge, big companies, massive high street names, and things like that. And that came down to the fact that, nobody considers offboarding as much. We put so much effort into things like getting customers in the door and retaining them. But as soon as they indicate that they want to leave, nope, you're out. And I kind of felt responsible as a designer because I had to sit her down and say, this email, which to the surface, to anyone else might look like a small thing, but when you get like 20 of those emails, it becomes quite difficult. And nobody had really considered it. And I just thought, well, that's my industry. Why aren't we doing this enough? Why aren't we thinking about the real situations as to why people might leave? We talk about voluntary churn, which is where you decide, I don't want to use your product, I'm not getting value in it anymore. But you might not be able to afford it. You might have lost a job and you might not be able to afford that subscription anymore. You might have had somebody pass away. You might have a running app and you're injured and you can't use it for 6 months. And if you have a terrible offboarding experience, you might not want to come back again.
Yeah, you're never going to come back. You lost me forever.
Exactly. Yeah. So I know we're going real zigzag here, but that's kind of what sparked me to start writing on online, to try and say, have you thought about what can go wrong and how actually we should try and handle some of that stuff? And from my own selfish perspective, I was like, I really don't want people to be negatively impacted. If there's something I can write about online to help people maybe think slightly differently, I want to try and do that.
Well, I love that, Bill. I mean, if anything, it highlights, I think, a gap in education. One, because I work with a boot camp and I don't think it's part of our curriculum. I don't know that I've ever seen part of maybe some 4-year degrees that I'm not aware of, university or something where they talk about this, and probably very small, like maybe a day out of a 4-year program. But I'm not sure that that's really like even a thing, right? Where we talk about like offboarding. It's really, it's you bring up a really good point, because like a lot of times people are like, oh, offboarding, like get the hell out of here. We don't want you anyway. But to your point, you might have a temporary thing where you don't, you're holding it off for a few months or whatever, or you, like you said, you couldn't afford it, or you can't run right now. So those are really great points. And I don't think a lot of people are really thinking about that. So I think the industry needs your voice. So I like that a lot. And I think that's really important. I mean, personally for me, I think education's got a lot to do with it. And then I think also, if I had to guess, a lot of it is just the software development process where, that's a cost center at that point, right? It's no longer a profit center to most people's perspective. But when I think you flip it and you reframe it, we just had an interview recently with Kate Pinkett and we talked all about reframing. And I think this is a really great example of that, but reframing that from being a cost center to potential new subscriber later.
Yeah.
Like in the case of your grandfather, right? Like your grandfather lost that subscription. But now I'm sure it's affected how you feel, how your grandmother feels, how your family feels, your parents, everybody else. And you're probably less likely now to go and subscribe to those publications because of your bad experience. And it could have easily had been, I would imagine, well, maybe not easily, but straightforward probably to adjust that offboarding experience.
Yeah. There was I'm not going to name names, but there was a company that my grandma had used for almost 15 years. And she completely, the loyalty was broken instantly, and mine as well. And I thought, okay. And, she said, I've spent thousands and thousands of pounds with them. If they could have just sent me a nice email to say, we're really sorry about this, or something like that, if the customer, because she had to call them, if customer support had a drop down to say, reason for leaving deceased, they could have made a really terrible experience slightly less terrible. I think there's a lot of things that go into it. And I think from my personal perspective, it's hard because when you think about what can go wrong all the time, like risks, I talk about risks a lot, whether it's, environmental risks or emotional, behavioral, anything like that. you're kind of seen as pessimistic sometimes because you'll constantly be like, well, what about that? And what about that? And it's not pessimistic, it's kind of being realistic. And I think generally in workplace, we see people as like optimistic or pessimistic. And sometimes being too optimistic can lead us to failure. And, I'm not trying to say we need to design for these 20 different people in these 20 scenarios, but that's where I said I think that there definitely needs to be more initial upfront awareness and intentionally saying, okay, who are we and who we are going to cater for, and then trying to flip it back. I once did an application for it was a mortgage application. I was designing one, and one of the first questions was for you to put in your sex, and it was male or female. So it was asking sex, not gender. And I said, well, you're going to block how many people can use this. And they said, well, the API can only accept sex. And I said, well, okay, if the API only accepts sex at birth, then allow people to put gender in so that they can at least, progress forward. Otherwise, there's a whole cohort of people that you're not going to be able to allow to use this service up front. And it's not to say, design for more people to get more money, but it's true as well, and businesses do want more money. But at the same time, we are, like I said, we are all people using these things, we're all just like muddling through life, and we don't want to be made to feel bad by tech.
In that case, it brings up a good question: is why does it matter when I'm applying for a mortgage? Like what difference does it make? Unless there's like grants or something that people, I don't know, maybe there's something there, but
I think it was just matching documentation and things like that. But
from finding like
all sorts of things, but
history or something. Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
You are right, though. I think generally offboarding doesn't get a whole lot of love at all, really. Retention and conversion, obviously, yes, like bring more money in, but I think people that don't necessarily realize the power of offboarding sometimes.
Well, you mentioned some things a little while ago that I think kind of relate to this. I want to just sort of circle back to them. You mentioned, how we do research. And a lot of times we use the term validation quite often, right? Where let's just go validate that, and that often turns into, let's go prove ourselves right. And so when you set out to quote unquote validate something, you set out to, because we've all got biases, you end up validating your own ideas instead of the other option, which you mentioned was discovery, right? Going out and observing people. And I can't tell you like how many times I've seen teams go and use a service, and not to say there's anything specifically wrong with this particular service, but usertesting.com or something very similar, where you're going and you're actually finding random people who may or may not be your target audience. They're being paid to take a test to do essentially a task test. Can I click this button? Can I click that other thing? And, to show how there's such a disconnect here. And in your example where I need to test an offboarding flow, the user can click this button. The user could click next. The user can select. That usability study just got, 100% pass, And so, but it's completely ignoring the actual way that an actual user would go about doing that thing. And so when you rely only on those types of quote unquote validation or research, you are missing such a huge part of the actual way people use the software versus how we perceive, the actual versus perceived behavior. I don't know if you have any extra thoughts about that, but that's just like something I just like wanted to kind of highlight and call out. Like you mentioned, I see so many teams going and just defaulting to usability study, user testing type sites and ignoring talking to actual users all the time. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's really hard. And I noticed I've used some of those platforms before and they can be really helpful, but it felt like a lot of it was, can you click this button? Do you understand where to go from here versus, is this actually helpful to you? Is this delivering value? Is this solving your problems? All that kind of stuff. And I think the sad reality is sometimes it's a checkbox to say that a bit of research has been done rather than proper research that, we as designers, we as researchers, we all know that we want to be able to do because we've seen the last couple of years that there's been scale backs. Is that a word?
Scale backs?
Yeah. Reduce.
Scaling back? Scale backs. Oh, yeah, scale backs. Let's do it. Let's go for it.
Oh, God, edit that out. But joking. There's been a lot of reduction in, how much budget there is for these sorts of teams. Or people mass sending out surveys and things like that. So an example I gave on one of my LinkedIn posts was, if you want to know how people are actually using things, like ask them to tell their stories. So if you said to me, how many times do I go to the gym? I might be like, 3 to 4 on a good week. But if you were to say to me something like, okay, tell me about your last month going to the gym, Like, well, I got really ill. My husband worked away and I didn't do this and I didn't do this and didn't do this. And suddenly you can start seeing things like, okay, what are the barriers to use? How are people actually using things? What are their drivers and motivations and all that kind of stuff? And you wouldn't get that from just a, binary, how many times a week do you go to the gym? It's all about framing and things like that. But yeah, definitely usability testing. Sometimes you can still get, can this person use this thing? Do they understand where to go and all that kind of stuff? But sometimes you do miss out on some of the context.
Now, you mentioned earlier too, like going and doing that sort of in-person observation. And I worked in enterprise for a long time. And I think there's absolutely a benefit to enterprise where you've got a captive audience, like I know exactly where Jimmy works and I can go bug Jimmy and his manager and I can get time on his calendar and all that stuff, which is a lot easier to do than a commercial app where, and look, to be totally fair, it's very hard to find actual users of a commercial app that even want to spend the time to do it, to do this, to participate. And so I'm curious, do you have any thoughts there about how, in your experience, you've done commercial stuff and in healthcare and things like that. How do you go about ensuring that you are getting those people and talking to the people and going where they are? Is there a technique that you found has worked?
I mean, firstly, going to caveat this that I'm not a fully bred researcher, so people will probably have a lot better answers than I do. But just from my own experience, like it is a challenge sometimes to get participants. So particularly when I worked in social care, that's basically the care industry. So care is going into people's homes and looking after to people to allow them to stay out of hospital and things like that. It was really difficult because the carers are super time poor and don't necessarily have time to have somebody shadowing. Likewise as well, because you're going into somebody's home, you have to make sure that the patient okay with you going in and seeing them in their home environment. That was difficult. That was, firstly, I'm going to diverge a little bit again. From my own perspective, that was an incredibly hard thing to do because it was so emotional going into somebody's home when they might be receiving towards end of life care. It's really, really difficult. And I think sometimes when we're doing research, we don't give ourselves enough credit that actually it's quite hard. Sometimes the things that we uncover, and you need to protect yourself too, depending on obviously the industry and what you're researching and things. That yes, absolutely, we need to go and uncover all of this stuff. But sometimes you need to, take a moment and say, okay, digest everything that you've just seen. And because from the back of that, you'll be like, right, I want to go and create the best product ever. And then you look at priorities and you think, oh, I can't do that. But in other ones that haven't been in social care, to be honest, we've previously just used a hell of a lot of like recruitment agencies to be able to get people that have signed up. And then you can go and see them. So when I worked for the NHS for a little bit, we were able to go and talk to GPs and doctors and things like that. It's a lot more expensive. You can't just put out a survey and say, hey, what time are you available? It's an added cost. I don't know more so in terms of, I guess, the B2C, if you would look at like Uber or Instagram or anything like that, I'm not sure in terms of research participation. But we've always found that if we're struggling, then you can put something in the app and sometimes people will volunteer if there's an incentive. But if we need someone really, really specialized, then sometimes we've had to use a recruitment agency to get some of those people.
I was just thinking too, like as you were talking about especially like the death care stuff. I talked with Michelle Prackron not long ago, and she worked in death care for a while, which I guess is like the funeral home industry and cemeteries and all those things, which, is post-death, obviously. But, thinking about some of the stuff you're talking about too, like just in healthcare, end of life, it's very challenging, like emotionally. And I would imagine for a lot of teams, they probably just don't want to go there, like they're just sort of like, they just don't want to put themselves in that position. And it's a lot easier to just design for that perceived behavior versus doing the hard work of going and observing and actually getting there. The problem though, with a lot of this stuff that we're talking about is like without going and actually observing people in the real world, I think it's very difficult to actually build empathy for a user. When you're only designing based on your perceived behavior, you're designing based on your own perceptions, which is not empathizing at all with the user, right? You're building based on what you think, not what someone is actually doing. And that is the opposite of empathy. And so I think like as designers, when we talk about empathy and stuff, if that's what you're doing, you're not really empathizing with anybody when you go and assume a thing, create a persona, and then empathize with the persona that you created based on your own ideas of how they would use a thing. That is not empathy. That is absolutely not empathy. So I don't know. It's just funny to think about.
It's really hard. I think personas sometimes just become like a checkbox. And,
Yeah, of course.
have a bit of a bugbear with personas sometimes because it's, like Sally uses Facebook 3 times a week and does this. And you just think that is completely irrelevant to anything that we're designing. So it's really good to try and focus on the behaviors of what are people actually doing? What are their drivers? What are their motivations and things like that? I think sometimes you're completely right. We either design on our own biases or on assumptions, which can be pretty harmful. I did a post a little while ago, which was on the power of notifications. And quite a lot of people use Flow and, for menstrual health tracking and things like that. And sometimes if you were to just trigger a notification, say if somebody forgot to log their period, if you trigger a notification to say, did you forget to log it? That can be really damaging depending on what the person's trying to do. So say, for example, if they're trying to conceive and their period has arrived, then that can be very, very emotionally challenging for them. Or if they have health problems, that it's not regular and being reminded that it's not regular, all that kind of stuff. So actually, a simple notification can ruin the entire experience just by making an assumption. So if we can understand, okay, why are people actually using these things? And it's not as deep as just tracking their menstrual health. It might be, to try and conceive. It might be to, they have these irregularities in their periods and things like that. Like to try and go a little bit deeper and then uncover those scenarios to say, okay, is this going to be harmful? What's the likelihood of this scenario? Because like I said, even a notification can completely make somebody go, yeah, I'm going to uninstall that because you've made me feel terrible.
I'm just even thinking too about, like a miscarriage or something where you're pregnant and then suddenly you start tracking it again when you weren't supposed to. And then it starts asking you something like, hey, you're not supposed to be tracking this yet. My wife and I had a miscarriage years ago, but like that's hard, man. I mean, that's like something that I would probably never use the app again if it did something like that and like reminded me. Yeah, that's huge. I think that's something, I don't know. That's funny because I imagine just a product manager just like, yeah, we need a notification for that. Like, oh, here's a feature and it's a checkbox and nobody puts any thought or effort into it.
Well, just to like caveat, Flow is pretty good. So Flow, you can actually.
I don't personally use Flow. So.
No, that's fine. But just so that people don't come away thinking, oh, Flow did this. They are actually really good, and they have a setting where you can personalize your own notification. So the notification that comes through, you can type it. So say if you know that it's a really challenging time of the month or something like that, you could write messaging to yourself that okay, this is going to ease some of that, which is really, really great. The similar is I spoke to somebody who fasts a lot, and they said one of the reasons why they uninstalled food delivery apps was because they always got notified when they were fasting because they hadn't, and they were like, I literally cannot order. Stop trying to tell me to do this right now. So again, it's all about what the contextual information of what that person is doing.
You brought this up before, and I want to circle back to this about bringing these things up. You're often on your team, you're seen as like a pessimist. So I'm curious, it seems like you've thought quite a bit about this, and I imagine you've had a lot of these conversations at work. So how does one go about bringing these things up with their team, with their product manager, stakeholders, without seeming like a Debbie Downer or constantly like poo-pooing everyone's ideas or the quote unquote devil's advocate? How do you bring these things up so that you're seen as less negative and more positive so these ideas actually get considered?
Yeah, so I think there's quite a few different things depending on like where we are in the process and things like that. But generally, whenever we're looking at a new bit of functionality or an existing feature or anything like that, we will start by just having a mini brainstorm of like what can go wrong. So everybody just thinks of like weird and wacky scenarios of, oh, could the person be doing this or could the person be doing this, to collectively try and think about stuff and start thinking about like risk thinking. But from my own perspective in my process, what I do is anytime I do any kind of map thing, whether it's a journey map, a service blueprint, experience map, anything you would think as a map, is I include like a risk row to make myself consciously question at every single step, like, okay, what could go wrong here? So that people can see it from the off. And it might be something like, an environmental risk. So could this person, leave the house and lose signal? Or it could be like really deep into the UI of, could they forget their password and how would they reset it and things like that. So people can start seeing the different like levels of risk. And then what we'll do as a team is then we'll start looking at things like likelihood and impact of it. So sometimes you might come up with a really weird edge case and you just think, okay, that's actually probably not likely to happen. But that's okay. That's fine. Or sometimes there might be something where we collectively as a team, we then say, okay, we think that's really likely to happen. And we think the impact of that is really high. So that's going to justify us to do a little bit more research into that thing. This isn't just about, we do other things to prioritize research and things like that. But this is one of those things where we say we cannot release it until we've potentially uncovered whether this thing is going to be an impact or not. And then from there, to be completely honest, it's just something that's so core as part of my process that you try and then be objective about it. So you try and say, well, what?
You don't want to be biased towards the edge cases.
Yeah, I want that person's auntie's dog to be able to use this product. I think sometimes you then flip it back to, okay, what's the goals and what's the impact of if we do or if we don't do it? So generally when I've worked really closely with PMs is I'll kind of do a few different versions. So like a version 1 through to version 3 or something like that, and say, this will happen if we don't do this. This will happen if we don't do this. And this will happen if we don't do this. And then we can kind of prioritize from there. Because at the end of the day, all we're trying to do is, yes, we absolutely, from my selfish perspective, I want to protect as many people as I can, but we're also there to protect the business. So if you can kind of flip that and also tie it back to the business outcomes of saying, well, this thing could affect our X, or this thing could affect this, or this could be reputational damage or whatever it is. So just trying to include risks and then reframe it a little bit to be, not just we have to design this. It's like, okay, how likely is it? What's the impact of it? What's our confidence this thing could happen? Do we need to do research? What's the effect of the business? So try and pull in a bunch of those things. I'm working on something a bit more helpful to people that I'm going to post on LinkedIn the next couple of months to try and like a frameworky type thing.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Things that I've just found in the past to help. But I think the biggest thing I always do is anytime there's any kind of, it's just include a risk row. Send people, I'm just transparent about it from the beginning and bring as many people in as I can. So if it's engineers, PMs, all that kind of stuff.
That's brilliant. I love that. And I just talking about those reframes again, I love the reframe there. It's less about our users' feelings are going to be hurt. It's more about the user's feelings might be hurt and therefore we will, we risk them not signing up again. Like use your example again, right? Going and telling your CEO that, it hurt your grandmother's feelings to get these emails. They might care on a personal level, but on a business level, it's irrelevant, right? What they care about is the fact that those emails now caused you and your entire family to not want to use those services anymore. And that has a business impact. And so, as designers, we talk about empathy for users all the time, and that's really important. But what's also very important, I think, is we miss this a lot, is how to convince the stakeholders that what's good for a user is generally, not always, obviously, but generally good for the business. Right? It's the messaging, it's the reframe, it's the how do you translate that, into something that's important for a stakeholder to get them to care about it. The other thing that I've run into quite a bit is, oh, this is just MVP. This is we'll iterate, we'll future version. And I'm curious, how do you, I'm sure you run into that. How do you keep these from getting sort of swept under the rug and on a backlog that no one ever actually addresses later? I'm sure you've run into that. When this happens, how do you handle that situation where you're sort of like, every sprint, you're like, hey, what about this? Hey, what about this? Hey, what about this? And then they're just like, Emily, would you shut up about the goddamn, I'm so sick of hearing it. How do you get it to where you're getting these things again, like brought up if they do end up getting pushed past that MVP line?
Try.
Quit and open a coffee shop. That's what I would do.
No, you're right. And to be honest, it happens in every single business where, we always push, there's always a compromise somewhere. And it's not like, even if you have sometimes the best case and the justification in the world, you just can't build it. And sometimes I wish that I could also code to be like, I want to make that thing.
I'll just work all weekend. I'll do it myself.
Yeah. Because, it is likely sometimes that there are that fixed roadmaps and it's one feature is scoped and you have to move on to the next one and you can't push out the timelines and all that kind of stuff. But I think sometimes I would always encourage people to show those alternative options and the extra impact that it can make. Because often it will be scoped at a very high level of, as from a PM, as a user, I need to do this so that I can blah, blah, blah. And then sometimes we follow that kind of to a T. And it is our responsibility as much as we can to kind of bring those other things to the table and say, well, if we spend a little bit more time here, then we can do this thing, which will improve this thing. There has been scenarios before where I have given options to say, well, this will happen or this will happen. And I'm 99% sure we will get this feedback if this happens. But it's a compromise. It's a decision we've made together. And yes, it is put on the backlog, and it's generally always prioritized when, how I've worked in the past sometimes is when we have a bit of downtime, we then look at the things that are going to have the highest impact, the smallest effort off of our little cake tin, if you will. We don't release things that will we haven't released things that we know will have a big negative impact. And I have been able to push before and say, absolutely, we cannot release this thing because of this backlash. And I think sometimes, like I said, being able to give that awareness sometimes and connecting it back to the business is you're kind of putting the cards on the table to say, this thing will happen. What do we want to do about it? And then it's putting like a decision log or something somewhere or things like that. But you are right. I think sometimes people think it's quicker to do MVP and move on, but you never go back, ever.
Never go back.
Never go back. So if you can say, well, if we spend an extra week doing while we're here now and the engineers understand the domain and are up to speed, then we're going to save ourselves in the long run. And we're going to, going to learn things a bunch of the way, along the way and things like that. But it is difficult. And I think sometimes this is going to go into a different conversation, I guess, but design, we're increasingly told to talk business and connect to the outcome and impact. And we absolutely, we do need to do that. But also our role is huge. So sometimes, particularly when you're just starting out, it can be so overwhelming to be told, learn how to connect business impact and learn how to look at priorities and things like that. And you just think, oh my goodness, I've got to learn how to do UX, UI, strategy, research, everything. I haven't got time to learn what, MRR means or like LTV and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. It's difficult.
One of the things that I like to ask my team, and this is something that sometimes it might be hard to guess or hard to gauge, and sometimes it's a difficult question, but what if we're wrong? Assuming this is the happy path, what if we're wrong? What happens if someone gets upset? What happens if blah, blah, blah? Like, what does that mean? We won't get the retention and people will unsubscribe? Does it mean, we'll lose revenue in the future? Does it mean we have a PR crisis on our hands and we're canceled by the masses on Twitter? Those kinds of things I think are important to address. And I love that risk line at the bottom because that's something that I feel like that would be like a really awesome place to highlight. Like this could happen if, there's a risk here, but and this is the outcome. This is what happens if we don't address it. And I don't know, I love that. I think that's really smart. I want to shift gears a little bit to service design.
Oh, yeah.
So something that I used to be a service designer in my last role, and you mentioned service blueprints, which makes me kind of think about service design. I want to dig into that a little bit, and I feel like I'm going to give you my opinion, and I want to hear your thoughts on it. But I feel like a lot of product designers today, they focus on the product, they focus on the thing that they're responsible for, which is this app, right? And what often people forget is what happens before I get to the app.
Yeah.
And what happens when I'm not in the app? We focus on the UI, we focus on the wireframes and the micro interactions and all these beautiful little things and illustrations and blah, blah, and all that stuff is obviously very important. But what I love about service design and just customer experience as a whole is, how do I find out about the app? How do I get to the app? What was all of this stuff that led up to me creating an account? What happened? And what happens once I close the app and go about my day? And I love service design and just customer experience more broadly because of that. And service blueprints are amazing because you get to see all of that mapped out visually. I'm curious from your perspective, how do you feel about service design in relation to product design? And do you think that there is an opportunity for more service design to help alleviate some of these things? I'm certainly biased, but I'm curious what your opinion is and how you feel about all of that in general.
I mean, I think that service design needs way more attention, to be honest, because when I transitioned into UX, I was like very much a self-taught UX designer trying to figure it out. And I joined an agency where there were specific service designers and product designers. And I joined as a product designer because that's what I thought I was. And I joined and I was like, I'm not really sure what I am because I'm being told to design the thing on the screen, but I'm trying to think of the whole system. And I don't know if it's because I came from a physical design background where you had to think of the whole ecosystem that you were designing in. You had to think about the ergonomics and just everything. So it's really surprised me when I came officially into the digital world and I was kind of told to focus more on the screen. And I was like, but what happens if they have ordered an Uber and they need to run to the toilet? Like, what happens then? Or like, what happens if they lose signal? What happens, all of these things. And it was really difficult because I had this kind of mini identity crisis where I was like, I don't know what I am. Am I a service designer? But then I really enjoy doing the UI side as well. But I'm not a full UI designer because I'm not really into micro interactions and all of this stuff. And I felt like I didn't know. And I definitely think some of the service designers core service designers I've worked with previously are just incredible because it's so much more than just the service. It's like, how does the whole company operate and all that kind of stuff. And an example, if I go back to the mortgage one, was, I can't remember exactly because this was years ago now, but there was some metric around how long it should take somebody to apply for a mortgage. And we were successful if it took under X amount of minutes. And I was mapping the overall flow, and there was the bit around documentation and the uploading of documentation. And I was like, well, if you're anything like me, my documents are in random folders. I have no idea where they are. Yeah. Like, I'm going to have to go and find them and figure it out. And how am I going to upload it? Because it's a desktop application and I have to take a photo on my phone. How's this going to work? All of this stuff. And again, it was because the very granular screens had been considered and not the overall system of what somebody was doing. You know, a person might have to go off and contact their employer to get their previous like P45s or something. I definitely think sometimes that product designers, it's difficult because they are, you know, two roles like lumped into one. I definitely think that everybody just needs to zoom out a bit more and look at what's the system, try and do some systems thinking, try and understand the overall service. How is somebody interacting with it? Because I think otherwise you do just get so focused and tunnel visioned on that one screen and it just ends up with a disjointed experience or something that doesn't work. So is that biased enough for you?
I'm nodding my head for everyone at home. I'm nodding my head in agreement, like, yeah, preach, sister, preach. Yeah, it is something I wish more, you know, and it's unfortunate the way that most organizations are structured because, like you said, those service designers are completely separate org a lot of times. And they very rarely do they ever actually interact with the product team or the product designers. You know, when we worked with the product managers and stuff who then worked with the product designers, but very rarely did we all get together and kind of talk about it. So it's like, I go and do my work, I present an artifact, I put it in a PowerPoint deck. Good luck. I hope someone does something with it. And it's unfortunate that those things aren't more interconnected and you know, it's I don't know. I think this whole problem that we're talking about is, you know, the designers I think play a role. I think the product teams play a role. I think the way our orgs are structured. I think the systems thinking about the system of how we build software is broken. I think in a lot of places, you know, depending on where you work, some teams might be better than others, but the whole system I think could stand to be reworked a bit.
Yeah, I mean, look at content designers. They are absolutely worth their weight in gold. And still have to fight more than, you know, we say that product design has to still fight for like a seat at the table, but content and service design have to do a lot as well. I see a lot less service designers in terms of roles and a lot less talked about. Maybe that's my algorithm. I don't know. But I've had the absolute pleasure to work with some core service designers and content designers. And it's just such a shame that there isn't always at least one of them in businesses. And then who gets the effect of it? The end user, like the end consumer. Like we're the ones that then get it. So yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I used to say this all the time to my team. We used to work at this big giant global conglomerate building software, and you would have a user who would be interacting with software that was built by like 7 different teams, and those 7 different teams didn't talk. Those 7 different teams had completely different priorities. They had completely different backend systems, databases, and you've got a user over here who's copying and pasting from one to the other, you know. But the thing is, like those they're all sharing the same template and they all look the same. So from the user perspective, it's just like, why the hell do I have to do this? It's so stupid, you know. And meanwhile, someone at the company is like, oh, well, that's Joe Blow and department blah blah blah. That's not I can't handle that. You're gonna have to talk to blah blah, you know. And so like the users just don't care. They couldn't care less. What they care about is having a good experience. And I think we often end up, you know, designing our software the same way our orgs are structured, and we end up with not Moore's Law. What is it called? What is that? Something's law. There's a law there. Yeah. Anyway, it's a law because it happens. I mean, people do this all the time.
I think that's why, I mean, design is really well placed sometimes because yes, organizations are quite siloed, but then as designers, we see across the whole organization, and generally there's quite good culture in design teams where you can come together and you can see, okay, you've got that problem over there that affects my problem here and kind of thing. And we look a little bit more laterally whereas sometimes product teams are definitely just focused on the thing they're working on. If I give you an example, if you look at like online shopping, I'm about to post on this soon, actually, like tomorrow, I think.
Can't wait.
But if you look at online shopping, sometimes it'll be, okay, how do we improve like checkout and get people to check out as much as we can? But then if you look at it, if you're looking for clothes shopping, sometimes it'd be so much more helpful to reduce the amount of returns. So if you can tell people, for example, like, okay, the model is wearing this size or it fits this way, you would reduce the amount of things that people would buy wrong and then have to return. And those are two different teams, checkout versus adding the thing and being aware of
exactly
product. Having that overall view of where can everybody drop out, not just at the checkout, and the returns would be really, really helpful.
And I know we're going like way off topic. Well, I don't think this is too off topic. I think actually this is like related because this all goes back to the overall problem of we're not designing software how people use it. But what I found as a service designer, you're often on the outside, right? And your team generally has very little control. And as the team who sees the system, we're often the only ones who are looking at it from that higher level from up on the balcony. Everybody else is like down there doing their thing and they have this sort of tunnel vision. And when you bring up these things and you tell them that they're doing their job wrong, and when you tell them that they should be connected, but they're not, and they are somehow responsible for this bad customer experience, you don't make a lot of friends and you end up pissing a lot of people off. And, I've talked with Thomas Wilson about this in the past, but that tends to be, I think, why service design doesn't get a lot more skin in the game or teeth really, is because people don't like being told that they're not doing it right.
Yeah.
And so you end up just making a lot of enemies and then you don't get power that way. So it's kind of interesting. I don't know. I don't know if you've experienced that, but
yeah, I think sometimes any kind of branch of design is quite difficult because we always think, we know best and things like that. And a lot of it is bringing people along the journey with us. A lot of it is facilitation and not making people feel like they are doing their job wrong or they don't know something or anything like that. And that's what I say when I talk about risks a lot. It's trying to reframe it to be an opportunity or what we're trying to achieve. And it's the same with kind of sub design and things. You don't want to go off and just map something in a hole and then come like a month later and say, hey, by the way, I figured this whole thing out. It's about trying to reframe things in a way that is as opportunistic and bring people along that journey with you rather than this is my right way of doing it. Do it now. Because you won't make any friends doing that. But it's hard. There's so much of design is soft skills.
That's the whole point of this podcast here, Emily. That's why you're on. That's what we're talking about. But yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, and if you're not familiar, you're more than a designer because there's more to UX than design. So yeah, that is 100% on point. I think that is a wonderful way to close out this episode, this conversation today. I've got a bunch of questions that I like to ask all my guests to help our listeners get to know our guests a little bit better. But before we do that, do you have any closing thoughts? Anything we didn't get a chance to talk about that you just want everybody listening to know about designing for the happy path versus designing for reality?
I think if I was trying to summarize everything I just said, it's to always try and question just what can go wrong and just consciously try and think, okay, what could go wrong here? Even if it's something that's not likely to happen, at least you've gone through that thought process yourself. So whether it's adding like a risk row to something, whether it's trying to reframe a research and trying to just think a little bit more, I guess, pessimistically around, how could we be negatively impacting people? And then if you can, try and connect that to some kind of business outcome. So everyone needs to think a bit more pessimistically, I guess.
But just deliver it in an optimistic way.
Deliver it in a really optimistic way.
All right, Emily, that's great insights. I love it. This has been an amazing conversation. I'm really excited about having you on today. People are going to learn a lot. I think this is such a really important topic. People learning about the happy path. That's all good, but we got to learn about the realistic way that people are actually using our apps. Don't forget, we are going to be live August 22nd. That's a Thursday. Time TBD, not sure, but sign up on LinkedIn or YouTube, beyonduxdesign.com/events. Sign up for the newsletter at beyonduxdesign.com, and I can guarantee you will get an email in your inbox to remind you about it. One more time, Emily, what are some things you want people to ask about on that live Q&A?
So anything in terms of how to think about risks, how to uncover them, maybe some more tactical stuff around how to get your team on board with it, or how to maybe connect to impact, anything like that would be great.
Fantastic. All right. So get your questions in early, beyonduxdesign.com/events. Sign up for the newsletter, and we will see you August 22nd. Time TBD.
Exciting. Looking forward to it.
All right. Like I said, I got some questions I'd like to ask all my guests to help our listeners get to know our guests a little bit better. First up, what is your favorite non-design book?
Oh, it's really sad that I read so many design books. I read so much nonfiction.
You're just well read. That's okay.
I used to love Jodi Pickle, which is she talks a lot about like
Jodi Pickle. I don't know.
She talks. I don't know if she's British, maybe, but she talks a lot about.
Sounds very British. Her name sounds very British, by the way. Jodi Pickle. I don't know.
Maybe it's a lot of like crime, like law books where there'll be something that bad happens,
Okay.
and then she used to be a lawyer, I think, and so they're very cool to be like, oh, what's going to happen in this, and you can just get completely lost in it. She I don't know. She has like 18 books or something. They're amazing.
Oh wow. That's awesome. All right, Jodi Pickle. I have to check it out. I'm curious. I do want to know if she's British now. All right. What is your favorite non-design podcast?
Non-design podcast. Okay, so I am obsessed with gut health, which is really weird.
Is that a podcast or? I mean, I know about gut health, but is there a podcast called Gut Health?
No, I listen to many podcasts on gut health. I think my favorite, which sometimes when my phone connects to my Bluetooth speaker, my husband will be like, "Why are you listening to this?" I listen to. I think my favorite one generally is around. She's called the Food Medic, and she is She was a doctor, but she's trying to help women understand their health. And that's around nutrition, exercise, mental health as well. It's just super interesting to know how our body works a bit more.
I love that. And you probably, I'm sure you know this, listening to all this stuff, but your mental health is very connected to your diet and your gut health and stuff too.
Yeah.
So
mental health.
It's all connected. Anyway, that's really cool. I have to check that one out. I'm not familiar with. I listen to a lot of history podcasts. So like, I'm listening to one right now, the History of English podcast, which is fascinating. It's like the history of the English language. And it goes back from like Indo-European and how like Germanic and like how, mixed with French and Latin and all this stuff. And English is just super fascinating. You probably wouldn't care less because it's not about gut health.
Well, you probably wouldn't care about microbiomes either, but here we are.
I don't know. I like to think I'm well-rounded. I might take a listen. We'll see. My wife actually would probably be more into that, I think, than some of the other crap I listen to. She has no interest, by the way, in like any interesting facts that I learn about like why some English words have like the C sound, but they're like cha, like and all that stuff. But very fascinating. I don't want to bore you with it, but it is. My wife couldn't care less. All right, what is your favorite meal?
So I am a sucker for a roast dinner, and very British, I guess. But I love a roast with Yorkshire puddings on the side. A roast.
Yorkshire pudding. I don't know that I've ever actually had a Yorkshire pudding.
Have you not?
In my life, never had it.
Oh my goodness,
I mean, I'm in the United States. Why would I get a Yorkshire pudding from? Unless there's like a British restaurant. There's not many British restaurants in the States, by the way. There's a lot of like British pubs, quote unquote, that are basically just like bars that they just say is a pub.
Oh, I love a good roast.
But there's
bit of beef. Bit of roast potatoes, a Yorkshire pudding filled with gravy. Delicious.
See, that sounds really good. What I love though is how stuff like that is like bar food in the UK. Like you can go to a pub and get like a bit of Yorkshire pudding and what is the bangers and mash or something? It's like stuff like that.
So if you go,
I love how that's a pub food.
If you go to a pub on a Sunday, they will pretty much only be serving roasts.
I love that. That's so cool. That's so fat. See, in the United States, you go to a pub on Sunday, you get yourself some cheese fries. That's the difference in the United States.
Cheese fries.
Cheese fries.
Like normal cheese or like nacho cheese? Like, is it like
it depends on the bar.
Okay.
Totally depends on the bar. Yeah, some bars will do it like really. Like actually, so I'm from New Orleans, and obviously New Orleans people, we take our food seriously. But there's a bar down there called Avenue Pub, and they have like very gourmet like pub food. But they would do cheese fries with like a bechamel cheese sauce, and they would have like really fancy burgers and like brioche buns. And anyway, very good. I don't even know if the place is still open, to be honest. But anyway, they would do cheese fries. But there's another bar down the street that would literally take like frozen fries out of a bag, fry them.
Really?
And then what they would do is they would take like, this is so gross. They would take like a Tupperware container, fill it with like cheddar cheese, microwave that until it was melted, and then just dump it on top of the cheese fries and then serve it with a side of sour cream. And it sounds terrible, but honestly, I mean, obviously the quality is not the same, but I had a hard time deciding if I wanted the bechamel sauce or like those other cheese fries. They're very good. Depends how much beer I had that day. All right. What is your favorite vacation spot?
Ooh, great one. I love the Dolomites in Italy, which are like really nice mountains.
Dolomites.
Me and my husband went on our honeymoon last year there, and it was just the most incredible scenery I've ever seen. And even more of a perk is that you can just get the cable car to the top, so you don't even have to walk to the top of the mountains. You can be like, I've climbed the highest mountain in Italy, and like, you haven't really.
I love it. That is so funny. I assume that's like northern Italy, close to the Alps.
Yeah,
like
so
Swiss Alps kind of area. It's close to the...
It's like an hour drive from Venice. So yeah, northern Italy.
Oh, okay.
It's very lucky to have gone last year.
Yeah, that's fancy. I love that. I have never been. Can't wait to go. I've only been to Europe for work. And at some point in my life, I need to go to Europe for fun.
Yeah, and then you can get a Yorkshire pudding.
Exactly. Yeah, I actually spent 8 hours in Heathrow's airport on a layover once.
Oh, that's...
Nowhere in Heathrow did they have Yorkshire pudding.
I mean,
couldn't get Yorkshire pudding.
I'm not sure I'd trust a Yorkshire pudding from Heathrow, to be honest.
I wouldn't have anything to compare it to. So I'd be like, oh, this is the best Yorkshire pudding I've ever had. All right. What is your favorite design tool that is not Figma?
Oh, okay. Is it really lame if I just say pen and paper? Am I allowed to say that? No, because it's not a tool.
You would not be the first. You would not be the first. It is a tool. It's a tool.
Okay, it's a tool.
It's a tool.
I love to just scribble. If it has to be a tool, I'd probably say something like Miro or Mural or something like that. I love doing stuff in lo-fi. I love doing stuff like content first. So I love trying to think about like, okay, what's the problem rather than getting swept up in auto layout and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, something lo-fi. So either like pen and paper, that would be my first choice, or like Miro.
Pen and paper works.
Yeah, pen and paper.
I'll take that one first. I'll log that in your official Beyond UX Design guest registry. You are officially marked as pen and paper.
Fun fact, I'm also left-handed, so I've absolutely perfected not smudging anything.
I was going to ask, my kid's left-handed. I got to figure, and I'm not left-handed, I'm right-handed. I got to figure out how to make it so like he doesn't get ink all over his hand. I had a buddy who was left-handed and he would always have like just ink marks on his on his hand. What do you just like, you have to do like this? Like
I turn the page.
No one at home can see, but
I turn the page like 90 degrees. So I write down the page. So I would do it like completely
sideways. You write sideways?
Yeah.
That is fascinating.
Weird.
I've never seen that.
It's weird, not fascinating. It's just strange.
Okay. I think that's fascinating. All right, Emily, so this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you coming on today. Before you get out of here, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you, give yourself a plug, all the stuff you got going on. I think you got a newsletter, if I'm not mistaken. Are you working on one? Give yourself a plug.
Yeah, I'm working on a newsletter. I have recently founded a design studio called Ampersand. So happy to chat to anybody about potential work or anything like that. You can find me on LinkedIn, and I post all things about risks and happy paths, designing for not ideal users and things like that. But yeah, mainly LinkedIn.
I love it. Ampersand, is that like a play on Anderson?
Yeah.
Like a last name? I like it. Okay. I get it.
Yeah.
I see what you're going.
Although my husband was like, if we ever work together, it can be called and. And I was like, no.
Is his name like Andrew, Andy or something? That'd be really funny if that was.
No, because he'd be like Anderson and Anderson, like and.
Oh, but Anderson and Anderson. Oh, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it.
That's went down funny. Like a lead balloon. But yeah, it was just Ampersand.
I love it. Well, I find it to be clever. All right.
Thank you.
Emily, well, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. I think a lot of people are going to get a lot of stuff out of this today. So thank you again. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Really nice to chat. Thank you so much.
Well, all right, y'all. That's it for Emily and me for today. I hope we helped to shed a little bit of light on why it's so important to think about those edge cases. We are not the average. No one is the average, and everybody is going to have some kind of path that didn't follow that happy path. So just remember, keep that in mind. Also, it's really important, I think, like we talked about towards the end there, systems thinking, the system 1 and system 2 thinking. I think that's really important. You got to zoom in, zoom out, zoom in, zoom out. Make sure that you are designing for the right context. Also very important. But I'm curious, have you been bringing up any of these things with your team? How did it go? Was it well received, or did you get a lot of pushback? Let me know what you think on LinkedIn, or shoot me an email at hello@beyonduxdesign.com. I would love to hear from you. If you like what you heard today, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would love it if you left a 5-star review. That would help me out so much more than you could possibly imagine. And if you know somebody who might find any of this stuff useful, then tell them about it. That'd be great. Don't forget to check out the Beyond UX Design shop. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/shop to pick up some big, beautiful UX-themed art prints and digital downloads that you can print yourself. Get free shipping on all orders over $30 and use the code LISTENER to get 10% off your entire order. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/shop to get your print on. Help keep the show independent and ad-free. Check out beyonduxdesign.com/support to find out how. You can join Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, Marty, and many others and help keep the show independent and ad-free. And you'll get rough transcripts and exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, including episodes before they're even released. You can get instant access right now to the video archives for as little as $5 a month. And if you've been sitting on building your new website, Wix Studio can help get you there faster. Wix Studio is a powerful platform that lets you create and manage websites easily. With Wix Studio, you can quickly adapt designs for every device, reuse assets, and my favorite, export from Figma, and much, much more. Check out beyonduxdesign.com/Wix to start creating today. Remember to sign up for the newsletter. Check out all the past episodes along with all the show notes at beyonduxdesign.com. I hope you keep coming back for more great UX tips from Beyond UX Design. And until next time, remember, you're more than a designer because there's more to UX and design. I'll see you around. Take care, y'all.
Just checking.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you said you were going to release the episode next week on Tuesday.
Right.
And you said it was going to be a week after. So actually, it'll be the week after that.
Shit. It'll be the 22nd.
It'll be the 22nd.
Damn.